Your presence has been detected and recorded.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, the wealthy, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. They're irrelevant. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media news, all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know?
It's been Washington's biggest mystery since Watergate. What kind of dog will the Obamas choose? Our resident veterinarian, Dr.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
And look, this is one time. Forget the conspiracy. Listen to our government agencies. These guys are telling the truth. You know, there's no conspiracy here, folks. Just get your damn vaccine.
All right. Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Mercury-containing vaccines may help, not harm kids, according to 2 new studies in the journal Pediatrics. There have been widespread concerns that mercury-based preservatives in vaccines might impair the neurological development of children. These new studies suggest that the opposite, that the preservatives may actually be associated with improved behavior and mental performance.
I think people should be careful what they wish for on China. You know, if China were to revalue its currency, or China is to start making, say, toys that don't have lead in them or food that isn't poisonous, their costs of production are going to go up. And that means prices at Walmart here in the United States are going to go up, too. So I would say China is our greatest friend right now. They're keeping prices low, and they're keeping prices...
Today, 6 corporations control all major media in the United States, including the principal television networks. These 6 corporate entities, in turn, control the information being broadcast on a daily basis. The average American adult watches more than 4 hours of television each day. The constant flow of entertainment, news, and information that is consumed by the American public shapes their perception of the reality in which they live. By controlling the dissemination of information, broadcasters and their corporate heads are able to control the masses. The constant, carefully shaped messages on television guide the public to predetermined conclusions. Therefore, TV has become a weapon of mass persuasion. In order to take back our minds and our lives, we must first unplug the signal. Turn off your televisions, cancel your cable and satellite subscriptions, seek alternative news sources, spend time with your family, and connect with your neighbors and local community. Discuss and learn. Allow new information to challenge your thoughts and opinions. When we unplug the signal, we begin to realize that the world matrix that surrounds us is false. Many things we once thought of as true are lies. Never let us forget the truth will not be televised.
You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some of the spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take the spring out of the step of the Easter Bunny this year.
Days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
Well, the final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
The final days of the campaign can get a little salty.
As you probably noticed, the final days of the campaign have been, well, you might call them just a little salty.
How often does your job call you out of bed in the middle of the night? Well, if you were a doctor, it would be often. And generally, there isn't much time to spare.
Coffee, Doctor?
Oh, fine. Have a Camel with your coffee.
Thanks.
You know, this night work's kind of rough, isn't it? That's right. But a Camel's always a pleasure.
Yes, folks, the pleasing mildness of a Camel is just as enjoyable to a doctor as it is to you or me. In a nationwide survey, doctors in all branches of medicine were asked what were included. And according to this nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Try Camels yourself, the cigarette so many doctors enjoy. Cigarette do you smoke, doctor?
Tens of thousands of doctors in all branches of medicine, in all parts of the country, were asked that question.
What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?
The brand named most was Camel. Yes, surveys show more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Smoke Camels, the cigarette so many doctors enjoy.
If your email inbox is out of control and you've given up sorting it out, a Baltimore company thinks it has a solution for you. Could this be the end of email overload?
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 Could this be the end of your email overload?
Could this be the end of 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 that email overload?
Could this be the end of 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 email overload?
Could this be the end to email overload?
Could this be the end of 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 email overload? Overload.
I scream, you scream. You know the rest.
I scream, you scream, 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 you know the rest. I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
Got it.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, we all know the rest. I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, we all know the rest of it, right? I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, and you know the rest. I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
Well, I scream, you scream, well, I think you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, and everybody knows the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, and you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
A day on the retail calendar that can be enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or a couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or maybe the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from the desk or even the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
From a desk or the couch. From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or a couch.
From a desk or your couch. From the desk or the couch. From your desk or the couch.
From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or a couch.
From your desk or the couch.
From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or couch.
From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or even the couch.
From a desk or the couch.
Enjoy from a desk or a couch.
From a desk
or the couch.
From a desk or the couch. Or wherever you like, as long as you got internet.
A preventative vaccine is in sight.
But soon, perhaps within a year, there may be a vaccine. A vaccine available to all that may be the answer.
You see, there's so much hope now, because this year we may have a vaccine that will stop crippling polio.
Help your National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis to store up supplies of the Dr. Salk polio vaccine.
It's all because of a thing called polio. Now, I know you've heard of polio because you've been given your polio shots.
But I was just wondering whether or not the discovery of the Salk vaccine made you forget about the kids who are still crippled.
I'm asking for children who are casualties on the battlefields of infantile paralysis. For them, vaccine came too late.
For them, the vaccine came too late.
The Salk vaccine came too late. But these boys and girls didn't get their polio shots in time.
As a result of polio,
The vaccine can't help them now.
Yes, but to fight polio this year will take a lot of money. $64 million. $64 million? Wow.
Send your dimes and dollars to your local March of Dimes headquarters.
And send your mercy dollars and dimes to your local March of Dimes headquarters.
Send your contributions to your local March of Dime headquarters today.
Send your dimes and your dollars into the nearest March of Dimes headquarters.
Send your dimes and dollars to your local March of Dimes headquarters.
Give every dime and dollar that you can spare to the 1954 March of Dimes.
And that's what every good American should do. Join the March of Dimes.
The public airwaves in this country have slowly been taken away from the public. There was a time when broadcasters were called upon to be responsive to the needs of the citizenry and present all sides of any given issue. It was part of their calling to be the watchdog of democracy. The media has abandoned their responsibility to the country. The view that gets advanced is no longer the view of the little guy, it's the view of major corporations. Editorial decisions are made with one eye on the political slant that will best benefit the company and one eye on the bottom line. The corporate view is tainted in that it looks for the best way to advance the corporation's financial interests. The result is this: instead of behaving as the watchdog of democracy, the media has become the lapdog of government. We are fed hours and hours of distraction instead of real news. Instead of an open debate on both sides of any issue, the side which will benefit the corporate media is advanced as the correct side. Any questioning of government policy is framed as obstructionist. We are losing our First Amendment rights. Something is wrong here. Very, very wrong. International bankers control the majority of the magazines, newspapers, and television stations in this country. Our media is not free. Our media is no longer from the people for the people. In the United States today, it is a select handful of super-rich families and tightly knit financial interests, a plutocratic elite, who own the big media and who control the government through their ownership of that media. But most Americans don't even know it. The average American has no idea that super-rich predators with names like Rockefeller, Rothschild, Bronfman, Newhouse, Murdoch, and Redstone are making vast profits and achieving immense power through their stranglehold on the American media and, increasingly, on media around the globe. On February 14, 2003, a Florida appeals court ruled there is absolutely nothing illegal about lying, concealing, or distorting information by a major press organization. The ruling basically declares it is technically not against any law, rule, or regulation to deliberately lie or distort the news on a television broadcast. You might want to ask yourself why the entire culture is utterly saturated with mass media entertainment from all sides, while the educational system in America continues its stupefying downward slide since the U.S. government decided to take over and subsidize the public school system. The bottom line is that the government is getting what they have ordered. They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much. That is why our country and our world has become so proliferated with entertainment, mass media, television shows, amusement parks, drugs, alcohol, and every kind of entertainment that keep the human mind entertained. So that you don't get in the way of important people by doing too much thinking. You had better wake up and understand that there are people who are guiding your life, and you don't even know it. The time to think for ourselves is now. The time to re-educate ourselves is now. The time to spread the truth instead of the falsehoods of the corporate media is now.
But man, you're never gonna get any truth from us. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them...
but for now we can call it anonymous love. Throughout ages we have been under their control.
because there is a spark of divine love that flies for justice, freedom, love, peace, unity, compassion, and furthermore, it moves with such a speed, with such intensity that it will never be stopped. We are anonymous. We are legion. United as one. Divided by zero. We do not forget censorship. We do not forget oppression. Respect us.
For 3 decades, we've sought to solve the problems of unemployment through government planning, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
It's been Washington's biggest mystery since Watergate. What kind of dog will the Obamas choose? Our resident veterinarian, Dr.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
And look, this is one time. Forget the conspiracy. Listen to our government agencies. These guys are telling the truth. You know, there's no conspiracy here, folks. Just get your damn vaccine.
All right. Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Mercury-containing vaccines may help, not harm kids, according to 2 new studies in the journal Pediatrics. There have been widespread concerns that mercury-based preservatives in vaccines might impair the neurological development of children. These new studies suggest that the opposite, that the preservatives may actually be associated with improved behavior and mental performance.
I think people should be careful what they wish for on China. You know, if China were to revalue its currency, or China is to start making, say, toys that don't have lead in them or food that isn't poisonous, their costs of production are going to go up, and that means prices at Walmart here in the United States are going to go up too. So I would say China is our greatest friend right now. They're keeping prices low, and they're keeping prices for...
Today, 6 corporations control all major media in the United States, including the principal television networks. These 6 corporate entities, in turn, control the information being broadcast on a daily basis. The average American adult watches more than 4 hours of television each day. The constant flow of entertainment, news, and information that is consumed by the American public shapes their perception of the reality in which they live. By controlling the dissemination of information, broadcasters and their corporate heads are able to control the masses. The constant, carefully shaped messages on television guide the public to predetermined conclusions. Therefore, TV has become a weapon of mass persuasion. In order to take back our minds and our lives, we must first unplug the signal. Turn off your televisions. Cancel your cable and satellite subscriptions. Seek alternative news sources. Spend time with your family and connect with your neighbors and local community. Discuss and learn. Allow new information to challenge your thoughts and opinions. When we unplug the signal, we begin to realize that the world matrix that surrounds us is false. Many things we once thought of as true are lies. Never let us forget the truth will not be televised.
The invention of television has made it possible for us to communicate through a combination of sights and sounds. Modern means of communication have overcome the ancient barriers of time and distance,
in which is visible a whole new era of communication. In one generation, voice and vision have transcended space. Science, engineering, and organization have harnessed the ratio between light and sound.
Do you suffer because your storehouse of words is smaller than you'd like it to be? Well then, hey, Don't touch that channel selector. Well then, kids, you don't have to... Hey, I told you not to touch the selector. This is all for you. This is all for you. This is all for you. This is all for you.
Psychological warfare has been waged against America for much of this century. This war for the mind of the public has been facilitated by the emergence of mass media and the transformation of American education by behavioral psychologists. In the book 1984, George Orwell warned that people were in danger of losing their human qualities and freedom of mind without being aware of it while it was happening because of psychological, emotional, and intellectual manipulation. Mind control. Mind control in America. The most effective way to protect yourself from subconscious manipulation is by being aware of how it works. What the conscious mind believes, the subconscious acts on. It works like programming a computer. Information is fed into a computer, and the computer acts on it. However, if the information fed into the computer is wrong, it still acts on it. If a person believes something that is not true, the memory banks of the subconscious mind do not correct the error, but act on it. The theory of cognitive dissonance holds that the mind automatically and involuntarily rejects information not in line with previously accepted thoughts and beliefs. Watching television often produces an altered state of consciousness. Though not consciously perceived, the television screen, while appearing static, actually flickers. Any repeating light or sound pattern can lead you into an altered state. A hypnotist uses patterned speech by varying the pacing and inflection of his voice to induce this state of mind in his subject. It is in this state of mind where one is the most receptive to mental programming. Whether or not the information takes hold in the mind depends on two factors: trust in the source of the information and repetition of the message. Trust in the source of the information induces acceptance of the message as true, even if it is not understood. Repetition of the message embeds it in the subconscious so that acceptance of its truth and accuracy becomes a conditioned response. Thus, this information will be accepted as true without thinking about it whenever it is presented again.
Get ready to read all these words on this page without making a mistake. Look at the letter at the end and remember the sound it makes. Get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready to read this word the fast way. Get ready. Kid. Yes, kid. Sound it out. Get ready. Kid. Sound it out. Get ready. Kid. What word? Kid. Yes, kid. Boys and girls, sound this word out. Get ready. Steel. What word? Steel. Yes, steel. Read these words the fast way. Get ready. Playing. Yes, playing. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Let's read these words the fast way without making a mistake. Get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready. Kit. Yes, kit. Get ready. Steel. Yes, steel. Get ready. Playing. Yes, playing. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Boys and girls, get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready. Kit. Yes, kit. Get ready. Steel. Yes, steel. Get ready. Playing. Yes, playing. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Boys and girls, pick your reader up.
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other. Every nation, in every region, now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy. There's no in between. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear. I will continue to make that clear.
We have an obligation to every last victim of this illegal aggression because all of this carnage has been done in our name. Since World War II, 90% of the casualties of war are unarmed civilians, a third of them children. Our victims have done nothing to us. From Palestine to Afghanistan to Iraq to Somalia to wherever our next target may be, their murders are not collateral damage. They are the nature of modern warfare. They don't hate us because of our freedoms. They hate us because every day we are funding and committing crimes against humanity. The so-called war on terror is a cover for our military aggression to gain control of the resources of Western Asia. This is sending the poor of this country to kill the poor of those Muslim countries. This is trading blood for oil. This is genocide, and to most of the world, we are the terrorists. In these times, remaining silent on our responsibility to the world and its future is criminal. And in light of our complicity in the supreme crimes against humanity in Iraq and Afghanistan and ongoing violations of the UN Charter and international law, how dare any American criticize the actions of legitimate resistance to illegal occupation? Our so-called enemies in Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, our other colonies around the world, and our inner cities here at home are struggling against the oppressive hand of empire, demanding respect for their humanity. They are labeled insurgents or terrorists for resisting rape and pillage by the white establishment, but they are our brothers and sisters in the struggle for justice. The civilians at the other end of our weapons don't have a choice, but American soldiers have choices. And while there may have been some doubt 5 years ago, today we know the truth. Our soldiers don't sacrifice for duty, honor, country. They sacrifice for Kellogg, Brown, and Root. They don't fight for America, they fight for their lives and their buddies beside them because we put them in a war zone. They're not defending our freedoms. They're laying the foundation for 14 permanent military bases to defend the freedoms of ExxonMobil and British Petroleum. They're not establishing democracy. They're establishing the basis for an economic occupation to continue after the military occupation has ended. Iraqi society today, thanks to American help, is defined by house raids, death squads, checkpoints, detentions, curfews, blood in the streets, and constant violence. We must dare to speak out in support of the Iraqi people who resist and endure the horrific existence we brought upon them through our bloodthirsty imperial crusade. We must dare to speak out in support of those American war resistors, the real military heroes who uphold their oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, including those terrorist cells in Washington, D.C., more commonly known as the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Frederick Douglass said, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters." The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. Every one of us must keep demanding, keep fighting, keep thundering, keep plowing, keep speaking, keep struggling until justice is served. No justice, no peace. No justice.
Now, I also mentioned, too, that a fellow that has been in touch with me for an awful long time, his brother was in the CIA, or is in the CIA. He will never talk about the CIA to him. He'll never give anything away whatsoever, except one bit of advice. He said, never watch the television. Never watch the television. It's the greatest scientific indoctrination tool ever devised. Haven't you figured that out? It's changed the whole culture of nations, not just one nation. Why do you think it was mandatory that everybody in Britain give access to televisions by the government? Why do you think China is under the same program to get everyone to the TV right now? Because they love to have you entertained. Do you really think that? And India is on the same route as well right now too. Most of your ideas and your opinions and how you emulate, because you emulate things, you mimic what you see. As Charles Galton, Darwin and others have said in the past. It becomes you, you become it. And that's what's happened. It's been very, very, very successful. Never watch the television. You can't watch a movie unless you do it critically. If you watch it critically, not there to enjoy it. Remember what they say, it's your emotions that get you on. And it's interwoven, all these emotional themes all through movies. You're played like a harp. And they embed ideas into you, along with the movies. And predictive programming too. So you'll accept that which is still to come. And you'll behave the same way as the characters in the movie when it comes. Oh well, what can you do? I'll just watch much music or television. Yeah.
Here today to meet the woman of my dreams. I've been talking to this girl on the internet for a while. I've actually been trying to save some money to go see this woman.
Did you talk to her online?
I go to the library, believe it or not, to talk to this woman. I met her on MySpace, and she's a very beautiful woman. She's tall, skinny, redhead, very beautiful woman.
Why don't we do it this way? Because you've never met her before.
Never met her.
Well, then I'm going to ask you to leave for a few moments, and we'll want to bring her out, let the audience meet her, and then we can both observe you two meeting, which will be nice. And let's bring him back now. Here's Brad.
How you doing? So good to meet you. It's kind of nervous on national TV, I know, but like, I wanted to ask, like, maybe, like, you know, you could be my girlfriend.
Well, Brad, I have to tell you, I'm a man.
I'll try anything once.
So, in his book, from the book Behold the Pale Horse, written by William Cooper, a former naval intelligence officer, in regards to a document concerning the American public, it states, diversion is the primary strategy. The simplest method for securing silent weapons and gaining is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic system principles while keeping them confused. And this is what these reality shows are doing. Confused about gender, confused about political, confused about your role. You understand what I'm saying? Confused about religion, confused about politics. It says keep them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance. Whereas the media, MEDIA, which stands for Multi-Ethnic Destruction in America, or Maniac European Devils in Action, keeps the adult population's attention diverted from real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. It goes on to say, the schools are keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history.
One of the things that surprises a lot of people, and it shouldn't because it's publicly known, is that our education system is not about educating as much as it is about socializing. Like the duckling in the chicken yard. If you take that duckling and raise it with the chickens, it's going to be imprinted, it's going to behave like the chickens. And in that very real sense, we perpetuate this. The danger is we don't just perpetuate it, we don't just enculturate it, but it's the only sane way we see to raise our children. And the result is there's no escaping it.
C.S. Lewis said, when training, which is Skinner, Pavlov, beats education, civilization dies.
He always wears really cool outfits. It's always is always signing, and that's why we were doing this, so we could be like Hannah Montana.
A document put out 20 years ago by Dr. John Coleman in the book, The Story of the Committee of 300, number 6, to encourage and eventually legalize the use of drugs and make pornography an art form. My question is, does life imitate art, or does art imitate life? If you're going to make pornography an art form, and then make it an art form to whom? Your little babies, my little babies? How does that work?
It was like a nightmare. I was down in Galveston 2 weeks ago on a vacation, and the last day I was there, a convention of cheerleaders came, but it was little kids at a competition, and there were like 10-year-olds dressed like prostitutes everywhere. And they were being rude to my daughters because they thought they were there for the competition. And I mean, it was freaking me out. In fact, we even came home a day early. I mean, people are training their daughters to be whores.
Wow.
Although education has proven to be highly effective in controlling human behavior, more intensive research would need to be conducted away from the prying eyes of the public.
The Tavistock Institute was set up by the British Empire to really study mind control and to scientifically drill down into human behavior and put in textbook form systems of basic control so that could be duplicated out to government and corporate entities. And Tavistock has been involved at every level of social engineering.
The Tavistock Clinic was founded in 1920 and operated as part of the Psychological Warfare Division of the British military. It was initially a voluntary outpatient clinic for treatment and research and was made up of general physicians, neurologists, and psychiatrists to facilitate the treatment of neurosis and shell-shocked British soldiers returning home from World War I.
Going through their own publications on Amazon, you can find that some of their books cost like $18,000, $20,000. And what that tells me is they don't want the average person to be anywhere near getting their hands on this book, because what it gives you inside those books is the teacher's edition, to use an abstraction, as opposed to the students sitting around the class not knowing what the answers to the questions are. There's a group of people who are being given the answers to all the questions about how we act, react, and how we've been understimulated with curiosity in order to make us more subordinative.
Entertainment is kept below the 6th grade level. When you start hearing songs like Laffy Taffy, and these kind of songs would hit your lower chakras and vibrate that negative energy, activating your pituitary gland, releasing those hormones. Now you got grown-ass men making songs for 12 and 13-year-olds.
Teach, brother.
I.e. Jay-Z. You understand what I'm saying? So the public is kept busy working, and the result is no time to think. And that's exactly what they produced. And they wrote about it inside of a book called the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Shaping the Moral, Spiritual, Cultural, Political, and Economic Decline of the United States by John Coleman. Now, John Coleman is the gentleman that wrote the Committee 300. And the Committee 300 is that organ that decide what the trends are going to be in the black community. So when you start seeing people wearing mohawks and tight pants and wearing 2 earrings and acting like women, that was manufactured and put among us.
Teach, brother. Teach, brother.
You understand what I'm saying? So we have to understand that. How they did it, they said they devised a system. And the aim of the 12 atonal system that they devised jointly by British intelligent operatives from Tavistock University or Tavistock Institute in England. They put these 12 tones among us, all right, and created this thing, punk rock and this other uncontrollable music. Look up Operation Paperclip and it'll tell you all about it. But Adorno was a system of music that could program the mass music culture capable of eroding the morals of its listeners until they declined to a point where they will totally be degraded by it. And that's what's going on today. The music is bringing us down to an animalistic level, to the point where we don't even care about the art form. We just want a paycheck.
Yes, sir.
So now it's cool for a Jim Jones to come out talking about nah, 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 and grown folks go for it. You understand what I'm saying? It's cool for these cats to come out with songs talking about I'm stupid, you stupid, we stupid. Why does that appeal to grown men and grown women?
Well, that's the thing. It's funny. You said all this stuff about rappers and stuff that I thought was pretty scary. And then it all started coming out in the news right after you said it about how it's a weird sex cult and Illuminati. And now they're all bragging that's what they're in.
Yeah, I think now they're trying to make it, you say it so much it becomes less important. They're
acclimating. They're just throwing it out there.
It's a fad. Everybody needs to do this. Yeah, right. No, it's still dangerous and people are still losing their lives and losing their minds and ultimately losing their souls.
I don't know why they're into this. Reportedly, Lady Gaga, it's been confirmed by multiple friends and managers. Someone has to sleep in the room with her, and she's tortured by demons and thinks she's followed around by ghosts. Well, yeah, you're telling little girls to worship the devil. Bad stuff's going to happen to you.
Exactly. So they're admitting these things. These things are out there. People are just not taking it serious. This is actual demon possession. And they're going through rituals in front of millions of people in front of our
Tony Blair admitted that he falls to the ground every morning and is possessed by the angel of light. This is mainstream news. And he said, yeah, what's the big deal? And flops around on the ground. The devil's called the angel of light. I mean, you can't make this up.
No, definitely can't.
Joe Bacan put out a DVD called The Corporation. He said children as tomorrow's consumers represent a huge market today and therefore a fair game. You understand what I'm saying? So they are attacking the children using tones and frequencies. And parents want to see their children happy. We go out and use our credit cards and our hard-earned dollars to make sure our children are happy. So we get the sneakers and the new video games and the new songs that come out and this kind of thing. Thinking that we're making our children happy, we're feeding our children's minds and souls to the wolves.
If you don't submit to control, if you're a radical, you're less likely to be loved. You're not fitting in with society. You're viewed as an outsider. There's a lot of social prohibitions about the outsider and the person who's going to upset things.
From the time we're very young, we're taught to, worship authority basically because that's our key to survival as young children. But as adults, we never go through the rites of passage that tell us how to methodically think for ourselves, and thus we're always in a state of extended adolescence.
Well, we take all this stuff, whether it's the television or it's the enculturation, the schoolyards, the teachers, we take this whole system, we put it into our unconscious mind. And it is the G-I-G-O that comes out, garbage in, garbage out. We simply, in that computer language, have harnessed our own power by accepting all these beliefs as though they are factual, whether it's the flat earth of Columbus, or it's the idea that I'm not good enough to be or to do something I've dreamed to do.
To the degree that the individual loses a sense of what freedom really means for himself, mind control is working. This is the constant battle and the struggle. What does my freedom mean to me? What is it? How deep does it go? How far?
I sit on a council of 13 people that take orders only from the Rothschild Tribunal in London, which they claim they take their orders directly from Lucifer.
I was the manager of Zodiac Productions, which Zodiac Productions, its name's been changed since then. I'm not even sure what they call it now, but it's the largest music conglomerate in the world. It owns RCA Records, Columbia Records, Motown Records, owns almost all the concert booking agencies in the United States. And that's not even the name of the company that owns it. The name of the company that owns it is Brenner Enterprises, and Brenner Enterprises is owned by Chase Manhattan. Chase Manhattan's owned by Standard Oil, and Standard Oil is owned by the Lords of London. You can track it on back. You kind of get the idea after a while. But I was the managing president of Zodiac Productions. It's one of my jobs as being one of these 13 people. Thus, I got to know many of the people who produce music and sing the music and play the music that you play. Now, one of the closest friends that I got during that time that I obtained was a man named David Crosby. Crosby, Still, Nash & Young. I saw David the day before Christmas last year, talked with him. I got him away from this witch that he had with him. He told her to go shopping. We were in West Hollywood, and I was witnessing around to people I knew. We went off in this store, and we started talking. I said, David, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. I said, I already know the answers, but I've been gone for 5 years. I'd like to know if certain things are still the way they were when I left. I said, now I'll have to explain some of this when I'm done, because you're not going to understand it all unless you know something about music. I said, do they still take the master to the temple room? Dave said, yeah. I said, do they still have the coven conjure demons into the master? He said, of course. I said, now, I got to know something. What's the main reason for rock music? He said, come on, Lance, you know what the reason is. I said, please, David, I don't want to guess. Tell me what the main reason is. He says, the same as when you were in, so that we can play spells on people that we couldn't cast spells upon. I'll explain what that means in a minute. I said, okay, one last thing. I've been hearing that you must be an initiated witch now to get a record contract. He said, that's right. He says, many of us that weren't total witches have to be witches now in order to produce music. I said, thank you. The master is a tape about as big as the top of this podium that looks like an overgrown 8-track that the album is cut on, and it's placed in a machine that produces and presses the records and the 8-tracks and cassettes that you buy. After it's been recorded, it's taken in. This is why a master's cut months in advance before it's released. On the full moon, it's taken in to a temple room about the size of this auditorium that is in every one of the major music companies, behind locked doors up in the executive offices. And it's placed on an altar sitting in the north of the room, and a pentagram engraved in the floor. And 13 hand-chosen witches and wizards and a coven come in and conjure a principality or a power up, usually Regia or something like that, and order him to tell the demons under him to follow every record and every tape coming off of that master.
I sold my soul to the devil. I know it's a crappy deal. This it came with a few toys like a Happy Meal.
You know, what was going on in my life at 15, and that's how I got introduced to the music industry. I swear I wanted to be like the Amy Grant of music. Yeah. But it didn't work out, and so I sold my soul to the devil.
How I came about being a lyricist is weird, because I started out technically, like I used to write all the time, you know, before I started going into the Rain Man thing, you know.
Why do you still do it? Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I mean, I made a bargain with it, you know, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with you know, with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And on this earth, and then in a world we can't see.
Yeah, well, sometimes they don't want to, and they're, you know, Gaga, we can't get, you know, the frequency's weird, and, you know, it's sounding a little bit strange, and I'm like, if you don't get this right now, I swear to Lucifer, I'm gonna, you know, I get a little bit mad, and I'm like, if you don't get this right now, I swear to Lucifer, I'm gonna.
What has this done to your career?
What has it done to my career?
What has it done to your career?
In what way?
How has it impacted, you know,
my
touring, record sales?
Album's #1 all over the world. All over the world. America's the only one, because I don't want to say too much.
But it's not #1 in the United States.
It's conspiracy, yeah. I don't want to say too much. I'm done. I don't want to say much because I'm hurting. I'm really hurting.
I had to ask some friends because I was hearing a lot about her, and so they told me, you know, who she was and what she was doing. And I come from the school of thought there's just some things that the public just shouldn't know. You know what I'm saying? Like things that happen between two people, a wife and a husband, girl. I just don't think that it's for mass consumption. I just have always felt that way, and I just think that the whole idea of celebrity and fame has become really convoluted and, you know, kind of bastardized, like whereas fame used to be the byproduct of success, and now it's the ultimate goal. And if your ultimate goal is to be famous, then you're gonna do a lot to get there, like sign your name in blood in a contract with the devil. Like you're gonna end up on a one-way street and it's going nowhere. Like that's just the truth. I've seen so many people like forsake their moral code and their value systems just for a little bit of fame, and it's not worth it at the end of the day. It's really not worth it.
Martin Lawrence is the guy that showed everybody you can make it from D.C. to Hollywood. And I had a personal stake in his success. Every time he did something, it made me feel inspired and really good. And he was always real nice to me. He'd sit me down, "What's going on with you, baby boy? What? We'd talk about comedy, whatever." And, you know, when we did Blue Streak, we were promoting it, and Martin had a stroke. He almost died. And then after that, I saw him, and I was like, "Oh, my God, Martin, are you okay?" And he said, "I got the best sleep I ever got in my life." That's how tough he is. So let me ask you this. What is happening in Hollywood that a guy that tough will be on the street waving a gun, screaming, "They are trying to kill me"? Yeah. What's going on? Why is Dave Chappelle going to Africa? Why does Mariah Carey make a $100 million deal and take her clothes off on TRL? A weak person cannot get to sit here and talk to you. Ain't no weak people talking to you. So what is happening in Hollywood? Nobody knows. The worst thing to call somebody is crazy, is dismissive. I don't understand this person, so they're crazy. That's bullshit. These people are not crazy. They're strong people. Maybe the environment is a little sick.
some of us are against the Illuminati, and we are against the Illuminati at our own detriment. When people are against the Illuminati, then they get punched in the face all the time. The press hates them, and nobody likes them. End quote.
I mean, we all love Dave Chappelle.
Exactly. Dave Chappelle has never been a part of the Illuminati. They don't want him or me or people like us. Yeah. But now it's not necessary for us to stir up that hornet's nest unless we intend to get stung 1,000,000 times. I didn't understand that. They had to sting me 1,000,000 times. Right. I'm still not going to join, but I respect it a little more.
All right.
You're managed by the company, and this surprised me. I only found this out. You're managed by the company. You look after S Club 7. You used to look after the Spice Girls, Simon Fuller. Have they tried to mould you in any way, though, if people ask you to do things to change the way you look or speak or behave?
Yeah, one of them tried to mould me into a big triangle shape, and I went, no. Nah, you know, I've got my own style.
Would you like me to show them how the sign of the curse works?
Sign
of the curse?
Completely
different.
How does it go?
No, not at you people out there in the audience, but this is the difference.
Aim it toward Red China, would you?
This is the sign of the horns, a curse sign, the 2 fingers extended. This way, spread apart for sort of shotgun blast, you know.